check, 1, 2, testing. Hey everybody, just checking to see if you can see me and hear me. And if you can, then we will get started. Looks like we've got... Hey everybody, hey Ricky, hey Ron, hey Barry, hey Peter, hey David, hey Manuel, hey Maz, Michael, hey Conservative is here again, Paul is here again, Mary is here again, Bruce, awesome, look at everybody, Rob is here, very cool. Awesome, hey everybody, it's nice to see you, thank you so much for taking time out to hang out with me today. I'm going to do the best I can to answer all your questions. Let's see here. UK, awesome, Andy. Glad you're here, buddy. Rob, looks and sounds great. Awesome. Hello from the far north. Chris, where are you from? What is far north? Marilyn, good to see you. What was that crash upstairs? I don't know. I don't know if somebody was taking something out of the pantry and something dropped, or if my wife was doing something. I'll tell her you asked, though. That's good. Oh, wow. Todd's back from Okinawa, Japan. Todd, thank you. I know you were in the last class as well. I saw you in there. Awesome. We got, oh, Canada. There you go. Well, I'm right next to the border. You're further north than I am, though. So anyway, well, let's go ahead and get started here. Thank you so much for taking time out to hang out with me, and let's get some of your questions answered. Brad is from Florida. Sounded like a drum set. Oh, thank you. Tony says, love your new guitar. I appreciate that. What if you bought all of my specials? I don't know what specials they are. Hello, Steve from Ohio. Hey, Larry. Nice. I'm glad you're here. So, okay, let's go ahead and get started. So Christian says, I'm going back to the spreadsheet here that you guys had written your questions on. So Christian says, what are some techniques for creating effective chord progressions? Well, it depends on what you mean by effective chord progressions, right? I mean, to be honest with you, the most effective chord progressions are the most common ones. Hey, Rich, right? So when you make G, D, C, like if you deal with your primary 6 chords, right? 1, 4, 5 being major, 2, 3, 5, or 2, 3, 6, excuse me, being minor. Those are probably, honestly, the most effective chord progressions, because that's what every song is written off of, or most songs, right? If you want to get creative, then you got to step outside that box. And one thing that I've always loved, hey Warren, one thing I've always loved about the guitar is that the guitar lends itself really well to exploration. Like, you know, when you first start learning how to play guitar, everything's very matter-of-factly. This is a D, and this is a G, and this is an A, you know, that sort of thing. But as you keep playing, you start learning some other things. You start learning different ways that guitar players play chords, like A. Like that's a really cool way of playing an A chord. You know what I mean? Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Victoria. Yeah, it is new. It's just been a lot of fun to play. So creating Christian, just to answer your question, because I got so many questions to get to, but creating effective chord progressions, what I would recommend for you, unless I'm missing your question, because that's all I have from you, the primary 6 chords, 1, 4, 5 being major, like G, C, D, and then your 2, 3, 6 being minor, which is A minor, B minor, and E minor. Those are the ones that you're going to be able to create, you know, all of those kinds of songs from, are those primary chords. Hopefully that answers your question. Maz says, could you tell everyone what is the best way to warm up to starting a lesson? Finger exercises, stretches. Okay, and I know you're on here because I just saw you. So for me, whenever I'm going to get into my hardcore practicing, like really sit down and start getting into it, sometimes my practices are more creative and they're less technical, right? So when I'm trying to approach something from a creative standpoint, I'm not as worried about my technique. And then sometimes my practices are very much based off technique, okay? Depending on what it is I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to write, or what I'm trying to play, or whatever the situation might be, okay? But, and I had mentioned this in the last class, and I just want to make sure everybody understands it in here too. And Maz makes a perfect statement here. Stretching is one of the most important things that you can do. learning how to do proper stretches, stuff like this, stretching out your forearms, right? So you do stuff like this and you push out. You've probably seen me do videos on these before on YouTube, but, different ways of stretching, doing all this kind of stuff, stretching out your neck, all these different things are really important before you actually get started. Now, all of that, though, looks like you're getting ready to run a race when you do that kind of stretching. So if you're practicing a G chord or something, you're still going to stretch, but it's different than sitting down for a 2-hour technical practice session. If you're going to do something like that, you got to make sure that you're really stretched out. Then what I do is I go through 3 different kinds of practice, okay? One is left-hand legato practice, where I just practice a lot of legato stuff. One of my favorite things to do, and I know you guys have seen this, and I'm not going to go into detail because I know you can find this stuff, but is like the 20-second exercise, right? Where you do each one of these for 20 seconds, right? Every one of your finger combinations you do for 20 seconds. And then what I'll do is I'll roll through groups of 3. So I'll play like 1, 3, 4, and I'll do groups of these. And I'll just roll around my fretboard doing these. And then I'll go back and do groups of 3 with my middle finger and warm up with those. And then I'll go back and I know I'm running through this and this will be posted in the masterclass as well, but I just want to make sure I get to everybody's questions. And then I'll do these where I'll start doing like this. So I'm going 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 1, 3, 1, 2, and I'll just warm up those. Okay? Things like that. Okay? Then what I'll do is, once I get all that done, another one that I really love to do is this. This is a super cool one if you've never done this before. And you can do it on any string, but what I do is I try and build single finger independence. So I just start moving one finger back and forth. And then I'll go to my next finger and move it back and forth. Then I'll go to my next finger and move it back and forth. Then I'll go to my next finger and move it back and forth. And I'll do those. And I'll do all of that for my left hand. Then my right hand, what I do is I tend to just do, for picking and stuff, without my left hand, there's not really much I can do other than just trying to, try and get my alternate picking and things like that kind of worked up. Because the next thing then is putting the 2 together. And I'll do groups of 4. I'll do groups of 3, which is usually scale exercises where I'll just play up and down scales, right? So I'll go something like this. Just over and over and over, just different things like that with the metronome and all that sort of thing. But then the biggest thing is I'll use songs. Like I might use Whiplash by Metallica for a speed picking thing, or I might use, it could be anything, just all sorts of different songs for different kinds of warm-ups that I need. I use songs for stuff like that, okay? Mary Beth says, I do handstands and headstands. Well, if I did that, I would put out a hip, Mary Beth, so I can't do that. Hey, Gary, glad to see you here, buddy. Gary says, can't wait to see your guitar and you in person in Fort Wayne, and I can't wait to see you, Gary. It'll be fun. We had fun last time. It's going to be awesome. So, yeah, I'll definitely be bringing it. Randolph, we're going to be talking about that exercise today, starting with an up pick as you posted. Yeah, we're going to talk about that really quick to give you guys something to walk away from today that you can actually practice, because I've got some more stuff that I didn't go into on that video. You're welcome, Mass. Let's see here. Paul says, do you know a series of chord progressions to create an echo effect for a song without reverb? Could this be accomplished with an octave of chords? Well, I don't know. I don't really know. I don't really know what you mean by that, Paul. And text doesn't always kind of, give the proper expression of what you might be saying there. So Paul says, is this my signature guitar? It is not. This is called the S Premium, which I got to play at NAMM. I finally got to meet my artist rep at NAMM. So Tyler and I were hanging out, and I was playing a bunch of the new Ibanez stuff. I've got an Axion on the way as well, but the S series, this Premium, is really thin, so it fits my body really well, and the neck is just really, really easy to play. Now, the neck on these are a little bit thicker than my Gems. My Gems are quite thin. This one's a little bit thicker than that, and the Axion I have coming is a little bit thicker than that. But the Axion I'm actually going to be tuning down and doing more videos on, like, drop tune stuff and things, because I'm using it for songwriting, so that's what that guitar is going to be used for. Let's see here. Barry says, still having trouble with 5th string bar chords. Any finger strengthening exercises you could suggest? Well, the biggest thing is it's not just the strength of your fingers, Barry. Two things to think about if we haven't talked about this already before is make sure that your guitar is set up properly. Make sure that the strings are the proper thickness for your hands. Again, don't let the world convince you that you need to have size 13 gauge strings on to be cool. I hate all of those conversations. Find what works for Barry, right? So make sure that the neck and the strings and the setup is proper, right? Make sure that your strings aren't too far away from your guitar. Make sure you have the right thickness of strings. If you're having a hard time pressing your strings down, chances are your strings are too heavy. I don't care if you have really big hands. It doesn't. The point is you got to find something that's comfortable. So start with understanding that the guitar makes all the difference in the world. And I do this in my classes where I'll take, you guys have probably seen me play my Ovation before. I'll take that Ovation and I'll hand it to somebody who's going, I can't press down these strings. And I'll hand them the guitar and they'll go, oh, that's really easy to play. And I'll go, yes. It's not just you. You got to make sure the guitar is set up properly for what you're trying to do. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't need some work too. It's very possible you do. But start with understanding that the guitar should be set up so it's playable by you. The string should be close enough to the neck that it's easy to play. String buzz, oftentimes string buzz happens because you are, here, let me get this in front of me here. If you move too far away from the actual fret wire, right, the bar itself, if you get too far away from that, it becomes harder and harder to press down, and you start getting all these weird sounds. You want to be right up next to that sucker. I mean, I'm so close to it, it looks like I'm pressing on it, but I'm not. But I'm that close. You know what I mean? If you look at my first finger, it looks like I'm over the top, but I'm not. I'm just that close. If I move back too far, I'm going to have problems. The other things you got to think about when you're making bar chords is the angle of the guitar neck and the angle of your arm. Because if you're trying to play at angles like this, it's going to be really hard to try and make this work, right? But if you turn your elbow inward, I always tell people the way you make chords is like this. Okay? Your elbows go inward. Because then this finger has got a fighting chance to do the things you want it to do. Okay? And if you bring the neck up a little bit, that helps a little bit. Where if your guitar is sitting like this, you know, you can see how I'm coming from the wrong angle like this. I need to make sure I'm turned up as close as I can get. So I need to not only be aware of the setup of my guitar, the string gauge, all that kind of thing, but I also need to be aware of how I'm approaching the guitar and where the guitar neck is at. I don't play with the guitar across my body like this, like some people do or try to. My guitar is literally, I have room to move my arm right here. Okay? And now that I'm on Weight Watchers, I have even more room for my elbow. I've been on Weight Watchers for over a year now, so just so you know. Okay, so then I've got ample room there. So my elbow can move as needed, and I can find that comfort zone. The other thing is that I don't need to make a completely perfect bar. I actually play kind of on the side of my finger like this when I'm playing. I don't play flat like this. I play kind of on the side, okay? And I only really need to be worried about pressing down on the strings that are not being pressed on by whatever finger's in front, you see? Now, I know that's a lot in a short amount of time, but again, I want to get to as many questions as I can within the 50 minutes that we've got together. But it's not always you. Sometimes you got to think about the placement of your guitar, the placement of the neck, the strings, how you're approaching this. And I'm telling you the truth. I tell this story all the time, but I'm telling you the truth. Thank you, Karen. I love the guitar myself. When I started learning bar chords, when I was a kid, I don't even know how old I was. I don't know, 14, I don't know, 13, I'm not sure. But when I was a kid, I was learning how to play guitar. I was introduced to bar chords, and I understood nothing about them. I couldn't understand why this shape was major, but yet minor down here, and it confused me because I could never remember which one was which, and I just hated everything about bar chords. But what I hated most about bar chords is I couldn't play them. I couldn't press the strings down. And I literally must have practiced, and again, my memory of all this is very hazy, but I would bet that I practiced those bar chords for a couple of months, maybe even longer. I don't know. Maybe it's so awful I can't even remember. But it was it was long enough to where I was ready to quit playing guitar. I hated them, and as many people do. And then one day I woke up and I could play them. And so I've always told people since then that my experience with playing guitar is not climbing a hill. You don't get better every day. You just don't. And even if you do, you don't see it, you don't notice it. Okay. Sometimes it feels like you're sitting on this stupid plateau forever. And then all of a sudden you'll wake up one day and go, oh, I can do it. And that's the story of my guitar playing. It's not like every day I wake up and something's better. Sometimes it feels like nothing's better, but it is working. It just takes time, right? That's how bar chords were for me. So if you get them, I don't even know, maybe it took 3-4 months. I don't know how long it took, but it took me a long time. But it's because of that insight of really thinking about what I was trying to do and how I was doing it, where sometimes what people do is they wrap their body around the guitar versus trying to have the guitar in a position that's comfortable for your body, which makes all the difference in the world, whether you're standing up or sitting down, right? Learning to put the guitar in a position, in a way, and have that guitar be comfortable for you. You'll notice you will not see me playing a Les Paul. It's not that I don't like Les Pauls. I've owned Les Pauls. I don't own any anymore. Why? Because they're a waste of time for me. I can't play them. They're uncomfortable for me. The necks are wrong for me. There's not enough frets for me. The 3 and 3 on both sides. I'm fine with it, but it's just not, having the toggle switch up here is really weird for me. And having the body back here, and it's really heavy and I'm 5'2". I'm a little dude. I don't want to be carrying a, 25-pound guitar, right? So everything about them is wrong for me. And I wish it was right for me because I love Les Pauls. I think they're awesome. But it's not right for me. So I don't play them. They don't work for me. So think about those things as well. Make sure that the instrument that you're trying to play is actually right for you, not just that it's a good instrument. I paid a lot of money for it. It's a name brand. Okay, but that doesn't mean it's right for you. You still got to find what works for you. So think about that a little bit. Let's see here. Sorry. Rich says, reference minor and major scales. If you move a minor scale down 3 frets, we get a major scale. Does that apply to the diatonic scale? No. I mean, maybe, but you don't view diatonic scales that way. You really don't. And after a while, you won't necessarily view your pentatonics that way either. But diatonics, you don't really view them that way. Like you don't play an A major and then move it up and you get minor. When you play, G major is what I'm playing. At that point, you understand that G major is E minor. Like G major and E minor are the same thing. No matter where you go on the fretboard, G major is E minor. They are the same thing. So there's no more shifting. It's more understanding the concept, the theoretical idea that G Ionian or G major and E Aeolian or A Dorian or B Phrygian or whatever are all the same thing. So your fretboard, no matter where you go, is G major, is E minor, if that makes sense without getting confusing. Okay? Don says, what's a good setup for overdrive distortion without your amp buzzing? That's been a problem for me. Well, buzzing could be lots of things. And the more distortion you add, you're gonna get buzzing. And if you have any lighting issues or bad cables, or you've got guitar cables that are overlapping power cables and something's not shielded correctly, you can get even more buzzing. Buzzing is a problem. It just is. Okay. But if you have quality stuff and you try and keep your power cables kind of separate from your signal cables, things like that, it's going to help you a little bit. Make sure you're obviously using a speaker cable versus, using a guitar cable instead, anything that's obvious like that. But if you like to run a lot of distortion, oftentimes you're going to need a noise gate. You got to get yourself some sort of noise gate if you're using a lot of distortion. Lots of amps have noise gates built into them. You can get external noise gates that you run. My favorite, which is a little bit more work, but it's made by Fortin. If you guys are familiar with Fortin, Fortin. Mike Fortin is an amazing dude, and he makes amazing amps, but they're all geared toward heavy, like Meshuggah and things like that. But he's got this pedal called the Zool, which is a noise gate that's just absolutely incredible. It's not cheap, and anyway, there's lots of different noise gates out there. But if you're going to run amp, or if you're going to run distortion, sometimes you run into noise gate problems. So then it's nice to have a noise gate. But, be aware of your surroundings. Just lights, all that kind of stuff can cause more buzzing for you as well. Bad cables, anything like that. Let's see. I got to move this over. My lighting is getting in the way. I can't read it. Let's see. Randolph says, Do you have any easy way to visualize the fourths and sevenths or the difference between diatonic and pentatonic? Just taking your time, really. That's the most important thing is spend the time visualizing it. Don't worry about the whole fretboard. Just start with something, So like if you're playing in, because remember the fourths and, like if I'm playing in C major, for instance, right? So I'm playing C major pentatonic. Here, I'll add a little girth to this. Right, so if I'm playing C major right there, you might just add in your fourth and seventh, 1, 2, 3, 4, and just get used to seeing it just in this top register. You know what I mean? Right there. Don't worry about the whole thing. Don't worry about the whole fretboard. Just start with one position. So if you're in C, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then you're 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if you think about it, it's just those two notes sitting right there, right? And then if you need to see them in other octaves, then you start visualizing it in different places. Like your 7 is right below your root. You know what I mean? But just don't try and go too fast. The big thing is if you're trying to make expansion, it's not just can you see it. The other two crucial things are, can you play it? And then can you manipulate it? Because you got to use it in your playing. So it's not just can you see it, right? So people get caught up in, well, I'm going to spend the next year and a half trying to visualize them all over my fretboard. Okay, that's great. If that's what your goal is, there's nothing wrong with that. But take a small piece and learn to play it and learn how to manipulate it. So when you're soloing, you want to come up here and do a... You can use that in your soloing. You know what I mean? That's the trick is, you can have this big scope because we're human beings, and I know I talk about this all the time, but we have this big scope. We want to learn how to do all this stuff. That's great. But just learn how to do something really well somewhere on the fretboard. That way, that's your go-to. And when you need more go-to, well, then you learn more. Grab another piece and keep going. But if you can't see it, you can't play it, and you can't manipulate it, you can't use it. You have to do those three things, okay? So let's see here. Larry says, not sure where to take an acoustic for setup. How do you determine how to trust? Ooh, good question, Larry. Someone knows what they're doing? I don't know. I mean, you try and hope that your local guitar store is going to be able to help you, right? So that's the big thing. And if it's a reputable guitar store that pays attention to you, which they should, I get so frustrated when you go into these elite guitar stores and I don't know, people just, unless you're somebody, they don't want to bother with you. You got to find the right guitar store. We have one here in Fargo that I just wish every guitar player in the world could go to because they're super cool guys. They got great stuff. They do great work. And I don't know, they're just good dudes. You got to find somewhere like that. And I know that's not always easy to do. Tail says the G string keeps going out. If it keeps going out of tune, one thing you need to do is make sure that when you put on a new set of strings or the strings that are on there now, although I will warn you, if you do what I say and they're old strings, they might pop off or they might break. But when you put a string on, you want to make sure that you stretch the living crap out of that string. Brand new strings, what I do is I'll literally take that string and I'll crank on it. And then I'll start pressing like the first fret and I'll crank, second fret, crank on it, third fret, crank on it, fourth fret, and I'll keep doing that. And then I'll tune it up and do it again. And then I'll tune it up and do it again until it doesn't go out of tune. Now, as I go thinner, as the strings get thinner, I have to be less aggressive because the strings will break easier, naturally. So, but the three strings very much can slip out of tune constantly if you don't do that. Because there's two things you're doing. You're stretching out the string and you're also tightening it up on the peg before you start playing or doing whatever, right? I've got a locking tremolo, so I got to make sure that I stretch these out as much as they can possibly go, otherwise I can't use my whammy bar and stuff like that. So I'll stretch them out, tune it up, stretch them out, tune it up, stretch them out, tune it up until they don't stretch out anymore. Then I'll lock it down. And sometimes when I lock it down, I'll have to stretch them out a little bit, unlock it, and then lock it back down again. But I try not to do that. I try and stretch them out as much as possible before that. If you don't have a locking system, you just got to make sure that you stretch them out to the point where they don't stretch anymore. Now, the key to that, and I don't want to go into this whole thing too long, but when you put on a new set of strings, don't clip them right away. Leave those long pieces so as you're stretching it, if it slips at all, you've got extra here and you're fine. You just tune it up, keep going, tune it up, keep going. If you've already cut them and they're already old strings and you start trying to stretch them, they may slip off of there and now you got to put a new string on. But if that happens, it's probably time for new strings anyway. Okay, so you just gotta beat the living crap out of those strings when you first put them on so they don't keep going out of tune on you. That's what you have to do. And it might seem like you're making new strings old. You're not. You're making them functional so they can stay in tune. The string still hasn't been abused by your finger oil and all that kind of stuff and dirt and all those things yet. It's still a good string. It's just fully stretched out. Always think of it like a rubber band. If you maximize a rubber band, you come back tomorrow, that rubber band is going to be looser. And it's going to keep going until it finally breaks, which is why we change strings on a regular basis. Okay? Medicine Man says, do you do guitar clinics at Guitar Center? Not yet. That's in the works, doing some guitar clinics. I don't have the time right now to set up, but I've been approached about doing some things like that, which I would love to do, but I got to find time to make all that work. Okay, let's see here. Whoops, I lost everything. Okay, Rich says, thank you. You are welcome, my friend. Paul says, what do I think about the Gibson JR45 sustainable acoustic guitars that just came out? I think those are really cool. They actually have one at the store I was talking about. That's the thing. There's just so much amazing gear out there. It's just finding what works for you. You know, I used to have a lot of guitars. For a while there, I don't know what it was. I was just collecting guitars and whatever, and I don't have near as many. I'm looking over here because my guitars are sitting over there, but I don't have near as many as I used to have just because it's so much work to keep them all, to maintain everything. And if I don't play them that often, why do I have them? Just from an ego standpoint of being able to say I have a bunch of guitars, I don't care about that. What I care about is playing the ones I got and making sure I got the right ones that actually fit me. So let's see here. Robert says, I have a friend who is a guitar tech at Guitar Center. Who is good for setups? Just trying to find someone you trust. Well, if you have a guitar tech, that's perfect. I mean, if you trust the person, Robert, that's exactly it. You just get to know people. And luckily in Fargo, Fargo's not a real big place. I had the same guy for many years until he got really old and retired, and he was amazing. And then there was a younger guy that came in and sort of got apprenticed and went to school for it and all that sort of thing. And they just know what I like. So when I bring guitars in there, I don't have to tell them anything. They know what string gauge I use. They know what brand I use. They know how I want them set up. So I just bring them in and leave them there for a couple of days and get it back, and I'm good to go. And I think you just got to build a rapport. That's the big thing is building a rapport with these people. So Medicine Man says, recording high-def videos, what kind of hard drives do you recommend that does not buffer? Well, here's the deal. I run 2 solid-state hard drives. Now, that's not cheap, but I do this for a living, okay? So I run 2 internal solid-state hard drives. I run one that has all of my, my operating system and all of my apps, right? All of my programs are on that one hard drive. Then I run a second hard drive that's just for the content. It just, the content just gets fed over there. Okay, so when I'm recording videos, the operating system is running on one of my drives or the recording software, whatever it is, and the stuff that it's recording is getting dumped over onto the other solid state drive. That's how I do it. So when I'm running my DAW and I'm running like I'm doing right now, well, I'm not recording right now, but with that kind of stuff, I'm dumping it onto the second hard drive. That way I don't take up too much space, right? I know where all my stuff is, and the hard drive isn't fighting itself for processing power, because all that's happening is the operating system is running and the program is running, but it's not also trying to save the stuff on that hard drive. It's going on a second hard drive. Hopefully that helps you. Okay. Michael Moore says, people think you need to use a lot of gain to sound good, but really just a little gain makes a world of difference. It does, depending on the style of music that you're playing, of course. I mean, if you're playing metal, it depends on what kind of metal you're playing. So sometimes it's really nice to have high gain, but that's relative to how close you are to your guitar. And you're right. I mean, there is an overload. Like one of my favorite amps that I own is an amp called Mezza Barba. It's the M0, and I just love that amp. And I don't have it here. It's at my rehearsal space, but that amp, it's very easy. My heaviest tones that I use for Slayer and for Anthrax and for Periphery and all that kind of stuff that I play, I never run the gain on that amp past about 7. And even that is probably pretty high. I would say it's more like 6. Because for me, what happens is if I run the gains too hot, it's not that it becomes uncontrollable, because it depends on the volume of my amp and whether my amp is facing me, or, I might be sidewashing on stage or whatever it might be. But my chunks get mushy. Or what I like that kind of compressing. Right? I like that sound, but I don't like when it comes too wide and buzzy. It gets too big. So every time I go for a palm mute, it's not an individual thing. It just becomes kind of a wash, if that makes sense to you. That's what I'm always careful of, okay? But, I mean, again, everybody's different. So, but I'm glad you said that, Michael, because it does make a big difference. Let's see here. Maz says, what's the best tube guitar amp? Is it okay to work with the tube amp with electronics and maybe a built-in attenuator, or just a real tube amp with something like an aux? Well, again, if you're talking about something with an aux, you're talking about a lot of money. I mean, I own an aux, but the aux itself is like $1,200 to $1,300. So it all depends. I don't believe there is a best guitar amp, tube or not tube. I just think you got to find what works best for you. I grew up in the days of tube, and I love the sound of a tube amp, especially when it's freaking loud. If it's not loud, it doesn't, it's all a weird thing, because you're talking about amps, you're talking about money, you're talking about volume, you're talking about purpose, all these different kinds of things. And if you own an all-tube amp, but you never really get to turn it up, you're never really burning the tubes to hear what the tubes sound like in the first place, which is where people get it wrong. They'll go out and buy a 100-watt tube amp in their apartment, and then they're running it at 0.0001 volume. A tube amp is meant to be pushed, right? But technology has gotten so where there's a lot of solid-state stuff out there that can replicate that tube sound, the sponginess of those tubes, the ability to clean up the sound. None of that stuff used to exist in older modeling amps. So it just depends, with a tube amp, running an aux is an amazing attenuator, but again, that's unless you got a lot of money, to go out and buy a whatever, amp for $3,000 and then throw an aux on it so you can practice in your bedroom, might be a little counterproductive. Now, if you're playing stages, and then that's a whole different thing, and it all depends on how much money you have to spend. So that's really a hard question to answer, Maz, because there really isn't a best tube guitar amp. It's some people like Mesa, some people like Diesel, some people like Marshall, some people like Fender. They're all so different, and they're all so wonderful. So, and that's why modeling has become such a popular thing, because now you can buy an Axe Effects or, whatever it might be, or a Kemper, and you can get all these sounds right from that amp. Now, again, there might be argument, is it exactly the same? I don't know, but I certainly can't afford to buy 15 of my favorite amps, tube amps, and I got nowhere to store them, and it just, it becomes kind of, I couldn't do that if I wanted to, So I use some of those things to generate some of those sounds. I love the sound of a Fender Twin, an old Fender Twin or a Blackface, but I'm not going to go out and buy one. I don't have that kind of money, So if I can emulate it to a certain degree on some sort of modeling system, I will do that. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. Let's see here. Actually, that G-string comment was adding to your rant about the things wrong. Oh, I see. I gotcha. But a very useful answer. Oh, yeah. Well, and again, I don't know. For me, the third string is the one that always winds up sounding It's the first one that starts sounding twisty to me. I'll start hearing a vibration. My third string is always the one that I've always fought with, because that's when I know it's time to change strings, because I can suddenly, I just got this guitar, whatever, last week. And I'm already hearing a subtle flatness to this string. So, which is why a lot of people will use a wound third string. You know, if they can handle the thickness, they'll move to a wound third, and then it kind of takes away that problem. But Medicine Man says, don't know how to restring my Floyd Rose. It takes some time. I think I've got a video out there of a buddy of mine who shows you how to restring a Floyd Rose, but it takes time. You got to have patience to restring them. And once you do get them restrung, you know, if you get it done professionally, if you don't want to have a headache, maintain the same brand and the same gauge of string every time you change strings. And if you're going to change brand or you're going to change gauge, bring it into somebody and have them do it for you if you don't know how to do all that yourself, or don't have an extra 2 hours to mess with everything. Because even brands, you can get a 9-gauge set from Ernie Ball and get a 9-gauge set from GHS and get a 9-gauge set from Dean Markley, and they're all, the circumference is the same of the string, but the thickness, the density is different. So then when you go to bend and things, it'll feel different. So if you go, oh, I want to try a GHS set, you know, especially with a floating bridge like these are. So you've always used Ernie Ball, and then you throw a GHS set on there, and you're going to go, and it's the same gauge, 9-gauge, you know, 9 through 42, and you throw it on there, and then you go, well, my tremolo is off a little bit, and it feels really weird to bend it. Yeah, because they're different. I didn't know that for years until somebody went, yep, they're not the same thing. They're just the same circumference. A 9-gauge, if you measure it, it's 0.009. But that doesn't mean that the what they're using inside and the density of what they're using is the same for every brand. It's not. Okay, let's see here. Randolph says, I'm working through the recording masterclass and I hope to start posting again this Friday. Awesome. With a better tone. I'm looking forward to hearing that, buddy. Don says, what about locking tuners? Won't light strings break if you backed off? Well, I use light gauge strings. I mean, I use 9s. I even use 8.5 sometimes, depending on how my hands feel with the weather that we get up here in North Dakota. When it's really cold outside, I tend to go to 8.5 just because my hands don't work quite as well. And I never break strings. I used to when I was younger, but for some reason, just as I get older, I think if you got a real decent guitar that doesn't have any, spurs or any issues like that, that helps too. But yeah, I don't break strings very often at all. So, but again, I think that's different. You take a person like Stevie Ray Vaughan, who used to break strings quite frequently, and he used really thick strings, and he'd still break them. So I think it's just different for everybody. Okay, take care, Dan. He had to leave. Paul says, oh, cool, I bought a new Fender Teleacoustic Sonic. That's cool. I was just talking to a friend of mine about those because I haven't tried one yet. So that's very cool that you've got one of those. Randolph says, how big are my drives? My C drive, I just had to upgrade it to a 4 terabyte because I ran out of space on my 2, and the only next size is a 4, so I had to go up to a 4 terabyte. And then what I do on the dump drive, on the second drive, you don't need a 4 terabyte. You could get a 1 terabyte or even smaller, but a 1 terabyte will serve all the apps that you need to install for the next X amount of years, right? If you get a 256, they're just really small. So I would suggest getting a 512 or a 1 terabyte if you can. They're not cheap, I know, but it depends on what you're trying to do. I pump out a ton of video, and this stuff gets really big really fast. And I run a lot of different apps for a lot of different reasons and things like that. So I went to a 4 terabyte for my primary drive. I guarantee you it's overkill for what you're going to need, okay? Again, what I just said. Then my other drive is a 1 terabyte. So my dump drive is a 1 terabyte, but I don't store everything on there. I put it on there, and then I divvy it wherever it needs to go. It goes to, for GuitarZoom, I throw everything on either Dropbox or Vimeo or wherever it is that we're going to put stuff, or, I'll put stuff on YouTube. And once it's wherever it's going to go, I delete them off my hard drive and keep the space. Now, if you're worried about integrity, then you might have an external drive that you back up all that stuff off and get it off that solid state. Sorry, because you can buy an external non-solid state and just dump your stuff on to keep it. If that's something that you need to do, and that's you can buy those for cheap. So the point of those is that first hard drive is really important to run your operating system, any apps that you foresee yourself using, and if you're like me, you kind of become a DAW junkie, DAW. You run all these different apps. I got all kinds of video editing apps and different things that I use for stuff. So it fills up space pretty quick. And then that second hard drive is for dumping all of my video and audio files. And then if I need to dump them further, they either go online to Dropbox or onto an external drive, which nowadays I've made so much content, I don't try and save everything anymore because there's just too much. Every day there's new stuff. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. Let's see here. Bruce said, in one of Steve's videos, he said he uses the 81 at the bridge, 89 at the neck, and the SA in the middle. And that's exactly right. That's what this one's got. Ivan has put those in. Tommy over at EMG, I work with him all the time. He's just a super wonderful dude. But so he got me set up with these. So yeah, this is an 81, an SA, and an 89. And basically an 89 splits to an SA. So yeah, so when I want, more funky stuff, I can go over there. So that's what that does, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's what I use in all these. I've got some other EMGs, like the 5766 set is a super cool set, but my comfort is in the 81, 89 SA system. I've been playing them for I don't even know, since 92. That's a long time, 25 years or something like that, which just makes me feel old, but it's been a long time. So they're what I'm comfortable with. I can get, if I have these pickups and one of my Ibanez guitars, certainly my Gems, which I've been playing my whole life, I can pretty much plug into any amp and make it functional. So I've always told people, for me, my world starts with the guitar and the pickups. The amp is always secondary. I can plug into any amp and make it work. That doesn't mean I love every amp. It just means I can plug into any amp and make it work. Whether I need a pedal or something to enhance the situation, maybe I do. But this is where my comfort zone is. So that pickup set is exactly what I use. Paul says, if you're by yourself playing rhythm with folk, pop, or worship, any tips on soloing between chords? Well, it's really hard to do a lot of soloing because you lose the rhythm section. But what's nice to do is if you can keep the chords going. If you've got a D going and you're going, and you keep that going. So if you think about having D, C, and G going in the background. Let me switch to a little different sound here. So I've got my D, my C, my G. You see, so I'm just kind of thinking about, or D, C, G, just something that I can kind of latch onto. There's a C, right? And then I got G coming. See, something like that, I might try and kind of combine those two elements together. Because if I just go off, I can try and emphasize the notes, right? D. You could do something like that where, but again, if you've got an acoustic, well, you could still do that, right? But you've completely abandoned your chords at that point. So that's why it's nice to have something where whatever it might be that you're trying to do, if that kind of makes sense. Okay? Gary says, at times you say Dorian means two, so emphasize the second note of the major scale. But other times you talk about flatting or sharpening a note to get the mode. Okay, wait. So remember, Dorian means the second mode or second chord of a major scale, right? So Dorian, if I said A Dorian, Gary, A Dorian means G major. That's all it means. A Dorian means I'm in G major. My chords are in G major. My notes are G major. My fretboard is G major, right? But A Dorian says you're going to emphasize the A minor chord of G major. That's what Dorian means, okay? Because again, remember, at the base level, modes attach the modal concept to chord progressions, not to solos, okay? Think about chords. So if somebody says to you, oh, you're in whatever, D Dorian, okay? The first thing you do as a guitar player is you go, well, what does D Dorian really mean? D Dorian means C major. Okay, well, if it means C major, that tells me what chords I have. C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor, B diminished, right? I got all that information. C major also sets up my fretboard because I know where some of the C major is at, right? But the second level of that is what the person is telling you is that the primary chord is D minor. So it's going to use all of the essence of C major. It's going to use all the notes, all the chords, everything like that. But its directive is the note D and the chord D minor. Okay? Now let me see if I finish the rest of that. To emphasize the second, nope, it's not emphasizing. Okay, well it is, but again, like I just said, don't think of it as emphasizing the second note of major. Think about it as what you're actually trying to do. Now let me show you an example here. So if I said I was in G major, okay, what I'm trying to do is emphasize the note G. But is G the only note I can emphasize? Heck no, there's all kinds of notes I can emphasize for different reasons, right? G isn't the only note. I don't start and end with G and just play G and every note I rest on is G. In the beginning stages of learning this, that might be true, okay? But as I keep going, there's all kinds of different colorful notes and things I could do over the sound of a G major chord. Right? Okay, there's all kinds of different things I could do. So if I'm in A Dorian, I'm really in G major, and all the things that I'm doing right now still fit in A Dorian. But what that's telling me is the rhythm player is going to be playing an A minor chord and then other chords that still exist in the key of G, right? So as a guitar player, I can still visualize the G major scale. But I am going to start emphasizing the second note, which is A. So I don't have to visualize my entire fretboard. If I can see my fretboard as G major, all I have to do is redirect what gets highlighted within the structure of that position that I'm learning, or whatever I can see on my fretboard, right? So instead of the G's being highlighted on my fretboard, now the A's are highlighted, and other things. It's not just the A. I can emphasize the third or the fifth, or even other notes, okay? So as this is playing, now I know it's an A minor, so my pentatonic is available. But at any time, I could slip into the G major scale from that A minor pentatonic if I wanted to. But I still want to retain some logic of, well, the chord, if I'm in A Dorian, that means that A is the chord is A minor, right? So I want a minor tonality when I'm soloing. Pentatonic is still going to exist there, but I've got all these other notes that I can try and emphasize. I hope that helps you a little bit in understanding that, Gary. But other times you talk about flatting or sharpening a note to get to the mode. Okay, well, that's a different thing, because what that's saying is, let's say you're visualizing your A minor pentatonic. And you don't know G major, and you don't realize that A Dorian is related to G major. You don't know any of that. Okay, what you can do is simply take your scale and add in the sharp 6. Again, you got to kind of know something about this stuff. I'm not sure exactly how far you are in this, but that's the raised 6 or the sharp 6. And that sound right there, Gary, is what makes Dorian really sound like Dorian. because without that 6, you just have pentatonic. So that's a prime example of a note that isn't part of the chord, because we're playing A minor at this point if we're in A Dorian, okay? It's not part of the chord. It's not A, C, or E, okay? It's actually F sharp. But that note gives the sound of Dorian because of that raised 6. Because Aeolian, for instance, would be another minor mode, but that'd use a regular 6. And Phrygian would also use that regular 6. But when you play that raised 6, that sharp 6, it sounds like Dorian. That's what gives it its Dorian sound. Hopefully that helps you a little bit, okay? Let's see here. Oh, my goodness gracious. I am so far behind. I had the same question as Gary. Okay, well, hopefully that helps you guys a little bit. Let me know if that does sort of make sense. Okay, you got to wrap your brain around the idea of what you're actually trying to do with the mode, and then find that commonality on your fretboard of understanding that A Dorian really is G major, right? But what does it mean when we say A Dorian? Okay, Chris says kind of partial to the Orange Mark III. That's awesome. Black Star Fly is a good amp. Yeah, I mean I know there's. I don't think there is such thing as a not a good amp. I just think you got to find what works best for you. Black Star Fly is a small amp. It's very easy to, actually sitting right over there, I bought a Boss Katana 50. It was like $200. I haven't spent $200 on an amp in years. So it was like, what the heck? Now, I haven't messed with it much. I was hoping to do that this weekend, but I didn't have time. But the Katana 50 is just I've got a lot of friends in the business that just rave about them as practice amps. You know, would I play it on stage? Probably not. I got lots of great stuff I can play on stage, but for jamming, it's super light. It's easy to play. I've heard people talk about the Fly, the Black Star Fly, same thing. I think they're all fine, okay? I got a buddy that's just diehard orange. Everything he plays is orange, which is great. I just think it's trying to figure out what works for you. Manuel says, I'm a Goo Goo Dolls fan, but don't understand the weird tunings they do. Will you be doing a lesson on alternate tunings? Well, I've done a little, but Goo Goo Dolls is a different thing. Like he will tune differently because, I've read this before, he tunes differently because it makes him think differently. So he's not just tuning like to a DADGAD or something like that. He's tuning like bizarre, because it forces him to think outside the box. He doesn't make normal chords then. He can approach things differently, very similar to, like, if you guys know who Annie DeFranco is. Annie's been doing that for years. And where they just, instead of, because every time you grab the guitar, if it's tuned this way, your G looks like that, and your D looks like that. But if you tune the first 2 strings completely wrong, you can't do that anymore. So what do? Well, you look for different things to try and play, and that's where their creativity comes through. So even if I did like an alternate tunings one, which I remember doing something before, you couldn't really look at something like that because that's more Trent is sitting there screwing around and going, oh, that's interesting. Not because it makes any logical sense, but because it just makes him think differently, makes him play differently. Let's see here. Steve, will you be keeping that guitar tuned down and adjust your neck for it? I hear don't leave the guitar tuned down if you don't set it up for that. Yeah, no, if I set them up to be tuned down, they stay tuned down. Usually if I tune them down, it means they get a thicker set of strings. And the necks may need adjustment. Sometimes the nut will need adjustment because the strings get super thick. But it's not a tough thing. You know, if you're tuning way down, you can't leave your normal strings on there anyway because they feel like spaghetti. You know, they're not really functional. So as I tune my guitars down, what generally happens is I'll put those thicker strings on there and then readjust it for that tuning. And then it'll stay that way. You know, if I decide I want to tune it back up, I'm going to have to pull those strings back off and readjust it. You know, so that's the way they'll work. So for that new Ibanez that's coming, I'll put thicker strings on it and then drop it down, and it'll just be used for that kind of stuff. I'm looking over here because all my guitars are sitting over there, but all of those guitars, I got 3 of them that are tuned standard right now, and then all the rest of them are just tuned different. Okay, let's see here. Randolph says, I have a 2 terabyte for my system and a 5 terabyte for my storage. Yeah, there you go. I mean, but they're not digital, need to upgrade. Yeah, that's the thing, is the solid state technology is just so much faster. But if you find that you're not peaking out your system, then you don't need solid state. For me, I'm usually running multiple things at the same time. And if I run a video recording software, and then I'm also running my DAW, my digital audio workstation, at the same time, and then I'm running a couple of plugins, it doesn't take long before my memory will just max out, right? So I got to make sure I have enough of all of those things in the system to be able to do those, because that's the technology that I need for what I do for a living, you see? So I get it, but you just have to make sure it's what you need, right? Micro Center now has 1 terabyte solid state drives for over $100. That's perfect. And it probably would serve you just fine to have a terabyte. I think that'd be great. What kind of loopers you recommend? Is Beat Buddy good? I actually have one sitting, maybe it's upstairs. I got one sitting around here that I'm supposed to try out. I haven't tried the Beat Buddy, but I've heard it's really cool. I've just been using the looper that's in my Strymon timeline, but because I don't make multiple, that's not really my thing. I know I've got some friends that just do amazing things with loopers, and I've never really done that. I usually just make a loop to jam over, and it's a great way to practice. So I don't need a lot, but I'm sure that Beat Buddy is probably pretty cool. Let's see here. Do I use a switch looper for your pedals? I do not. I just use regular pedals. And let's see here. Bruce says, what brand effects pedals do I run? Well, let's look down at the floor here, which I can't show you right now, but I've got a TC Electronics Polytune that I use for tuning. That way I can hit the button, I can go like that, and I can tune my guitar in a very short amount of time when I'm on stage. That goes into a Digitech drop pedal. So if I need to tune down in a pinch for a lesson or when I'm on stage, you know, I'll use the drop pedal for that. That then goes into my Digitech Harmony Man pedal, which I use very little, but the Harmony Man pedal I'll use sometimes for harmonies, because most of the time the bands I play in, I'm the only guitar player. So every once in a while I'll come across something where I really do need an extra harmony, or you know, maybe an octave or something like that, and that's where I'll use my harmony pedal for. That then feeds into my Fortin grind pedal, and the grind pedal is a super cool pedal, which kind of thins it up, which is great when you're tuned down. So I'll use that Fortin grind sometimes to take my signal and kind of drop off the low end and make it kind of thin, like modern metal oftentimes is when you tune down. But then that goes into one of my favorite pedals, which is the Strymon Riverside. The Riverside is just this multitasking, distortion, transparent monster. The Strymon Riverside, I could take that and put it in front of any amp and get a sound that I need, from crunch to hard. I mean, again, not Meshuggah or something like that, not that heavy, but for rock and roll, for metal, for regular metal, I certainly could with that Strymon Riverside. So that pedal is absolutely my go-to pedal. And then I've got my wah, which I run a Morley Steve Vai Bad Horsey wah. I run the first series, not the Bad Horsey 2. I own those, and I'd rather have the first one. And that's what I run. And then I have, to run into the effects loop, I have my Eventide H9, I have a Strymon Timeline, and a Strymon Big Sky. Now, oftentimes when I play, I won't bring, that's my pedal board that I'm looking at right now. But often when I'm playing, I won't even use that. I'll just use whatever's coming direct from here. Okay, so it kind of depends on what I'm doing. So, a lot of bands, I don't need all that, but sometimes I need to pre-plan some things, and that's where this will come in. Okay, so hopefully that helps you. Let's see here. Mary Beth said, never heard of the drop pedal. Yeah, it's a cool pedal. It's does it take the place of being tuned down? No, but in circumstances when you're not tuned, like I would never just use it for an entire night on stage instead of tuning down, because it feels a little different and it sounds a little different. But for a song or two, absolutely, I would absolutely use it for something like that. Instead of bringing, another guitar on the road just for a song or something, most of the time when I go on the road, I am my own roadie, or the band is, right? So I don't want to be bringing just a bunch of guitars and have them all on stage with potential of somebody jumping on stage and knocking it over, and it's just easier to use my guitar. So I'll use it for things like that. If there's a bunch of stuff, then yeah, I'll have another guitar that I'll use and things like that. But yeah, it's a cool pedal. I like it. Let's see here. Okay, so Scott got a beat buddy, which is cool. Okay, cool. Well, it looks like we all got our things going here. It's 8 o'clock. I'm going to get going. I got to go upstairs and do my ritual of eating some supper and helping my daughter with her spelling. So that's what I'll be doing with my evening. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and hopefully you learned a little something tonight. I will post this this video in the masterclass group so you can watch it again to grab some more stuff. But guys, thank you so much. Thank you for taking time and hanging out with me. I can't wait to meet some of you in Fort Wayne in June. I hope you all can make it, or some of you at least can make it. So take care, everybody. Stay positive and keep practicing. And